Do you have any liberal points of view?
I have a few on things like wealth inequality. I think you can have too much wealth inequality in a society. I think we probably do have too much, which is a thing I argue with my fellow conservatives about a lot. And and I'm irreligious, which usually travels with religion, with liberalism. Although there's a little cadre of irreligious conservatives. We founded a website called Secular Right. So yeah, in some ways I'm off the conservative reservation. But then conservatives are independent thinkers. We don't follow the herd. We machete our own way through the jungle.
The immigration, another chapter, immigration invading the world. You have a chapter, and you say there may be a case for immigration from Somalia, Iraq, and the Dominican Republic, but the Nobel Prize just doesn't make it. In fact, it rather argues against it. So you're making the historical conservative argument, the Pat Buchanan argument, that immigration from Europe was okay. But once you get people from other countries that may not be socialized as we are, look like we are, different skin color perhaps, it's not as acceptable in terms of where you want America to be going.
Well, I think probably where you and I, the core point here where you and I would disagree is on population quality. Human populations, and again, I say I'm an empiricist. I try to look at the science of the thing. Human populations have different characteristics. They have abilities are differently distributed. The differences are statistical. The differences between populations are statistical and they're slight. But when you have big numbers of people, they matter. And I think that Nobel Prize list, where is the Nobel Prize list? Hold on. 199. Excuse me. Excuse me just a moment. I'm trying to find my Nobel Prize list.
The immigration chapter starts on...
199, yeah. Okay, just checking. I'll just read you out. Just checking the handy Wikipedia list of Nobel Prize winners by citizenship and nation of origin.
We all can believe Wikipedia.
This is in response to a claim that immigration has been good for our Nobel Prize list. I see that of the 17 American winners for the years 2005 to 2007, 4 are immigrants. They came from Russia, Italy, England, and Germany. So I'm confounding this guy's argument. He says immigration to court is good for bumping up your Nobel Prize winners. And I'm saying, well, immigration from Russia, England, Italy, and Germany is, but it is not proven that immigration from anywhere else is.
Well, immigration, and, you know, you have a very small percentage of people who are Nobel Prize winners. And to simply use that as the benchmark by which you judge whether or not we should have immigration from X country or Y country seems an awfully small sample. And it sounds racist to say these countries but not these countries, doesn't it?
Probably. But again, to the first point, I'm refuting a point that Robert Putnam made. I'm refuting his point. I'm not pulling this out of thin air. As to whether it's racist, I'm not. I can.
I'm not suggesting you're racist. I'm simply saying this mindset.
By all means, suggest it. I can only say again, I'm an empiricist. I look at the facts and try to make proper deductions from the facts about the world. I'm not interested in whether something is racist or not. My eyes glaze over when you say that. What I want to know is it true? Is it true or is it false? If you can find something I've said in my book that's false, I'll be glad to argue with you about it, as indeed we are doing. But if you find something in my book and you say, oh, that's racist, sorry, you just lost me. I'm not interested.
Well, I would argue...
Is it true or is it false? You want to hit me on education?
We did. We talked
about education.
We did talk about that.
How about diversity?
Oh, yeah. You got a real problem with diversity. Well, that also feeds into the immigration chapter as well. You don't like the idea that... well, what is your problem with diversity? Why is it... Let me bring up that chapter here. You got Yale or jail. I like that one. Those are your two choices. What's the problem with diversity? Why is that a bad thing?
Well, I let Professor Robert Putnam speak. This is a Harvard professor of sociology, and he did a survey back in 2001. Robert Putnam, some of you may have heard of Robert Putnam. He's a very highly respected scholar in his field. He wrote a book called Bowling Alone, back in the 90s. And it developed his main idea, which is of social capital. You know, economists talk about physical capital, which is goods and money and so on, and intellectual capital. And Putnam talks about social capital. Social capital is the value added to a society or to a community of social networks of all kinds, you know, Boy Scout troops and churches and carpools, ordinary friendships, every kind of voluntary social network. That all adds up to social capital. And he says, what I think is right, and I think we'd all agree, that social capital is a good thing. It's a good thing for a society to have lots of social capital. And he wrote this book, Bowling Alone, where he lamented the loss of social capital in America over the last quarter of the 20th century. Well, now, after that, in 2000, he decided to try to find out why we're losing our social capital. Why are we losing it? What's driving that? And he found that one reason we're losing it is our diversity, our increasing diversity. He conducted surveys all over the United States, very big surveys. You know, it's just Harvard University. They got a bundle of money. They got a, what is it, $30 billion endowment. Probably a lot less now, but at that time, a big endowment. So he had tens of thousands of people in these surveys that he did, trying to find out whether diversity helped or hindered social capital. And he found out, to his dismay, because he himself is a liberal, he found out that the more diversity you have, the less social capital you have. The more diversity you have in a community, the less people associate, the less people talk to each other, the less people carpool, the less people join voluntary groups. And that was a very shocking finding for him, as I tell the story in my book. He waited 6 years before publishing his results. He disliked his results so much. But fortunately, like me, he's an empiricist, and he wants the facts to speak. And at last he did let them speak. And he published a paper on this. A rather odd paper, which I have a little bit of fun with. But yeah, diversity is not good for you. It's bad for your society.
You say, in fact, in this diversity chapter, it's an early chapter in the book, the American philosophical constitutional creed is unlikely to retain its salience if Americans abandon the Anglo-Protestant culture in which it has been rooted. Again, I guess I conflated this in my mind with the immigration chapter, but basically you're saying we should stay white, we should stay Christian, and anything that goes away from that is somehow not good for this country. Is that basically your point of view?
Well, first of all, I'd just like to say that the words you just quoted are not my words.
Well, Anglo-Protestant.
They're the words of Professor Samuel Huntington.
Yes, right.
But
you're underscoring them as if to buttress your own position.
Yes, that's what you do. You quote scholars to support your position.
Correct.
When you write a book.
Right.
Yes.
So my point is, this is your view.
Yes.
So we'd be better off to stay Christian and white.
I don't know about Christian. Probably yes. Probably we would. Yeah.
Would you?
But no. You're getting ahead of the argument there. Stay white. We are not white. We have never been white, and I give over a whole section to that. This country, from the beginning, was diverse. This country, from its very birth, had diversity. This is the other half of my diversity chapter. We can't not be diverse. The United States can't not be diverse. So we have this issue that diversity is not very good for your society, A, and B, that the United States always has been diverse and it can't not be diverse. And the conclusion that I come to in my chapter is that we should struggle with the diversity the nation was born with, but we're fools to make it worse. And we're fools to think that it's a positive and to pretend to ourselves that it's a positive. It's an obstacle to be overcome. It's not a positive. There's nothing to celebrate. The title of the chapter is Diversity, Nothing to Celebrate. It's nothing to celebrate. We can't avoid it, but we shouldn't make it worse.
You say we were diverse. Well, I don't know how diverse the Pilgrims were. I don't know how diverse the country was in the 18th century or the early part of the 19th or rather the 20th century when, as we talked about earlier, most of the immigration came from Europe. And now when you talk about, well, should we bring them in from Somalia and a bunch of these other countries, how this is particularly not good for the country, again, it sounds like you are advocating for keeping America white, keeping it Christian, and perhaps even having laws that would mitigate against it becoming anything else.
As I just explained to you, Alan, this is not a white country, and it never has been. I actually quote the percentages at the founding of this country. The present territory of the 48 states at the founding was about 62% white European, about 22% Native American, and about 16% African American. As Alan said, the great wave of immigration in the late 19th century, early 20th century, mainly just made America whiter. So that the 1950 census, in the 1950 census, America was essentially 90% white, 10% black, and a rounding error of other. So that's the diversity we had in 1950. I would argue that we could have coped with that diversity. We could have stayed one nation. We could have overcome the problems that we had in 1950 between black and white. We could have overcome them if we had not been such bloody fools as to import tens of millions of even more diverse people.
In other words,
we should not have done that.
As long as the black population stays below a certain amount, we can cope.
Yes, I think that's true. Yes, I think we can get on with each other. You know, Americans, black Americans, have been here longer than most white Americans.
Well,
actually,
when you say that, well, so are Native Americans are here longer than anybody. When you say what you just said, combined with your quoting in the book, where creed is unlikely to retain its salience if Americans abandon the Anglo-Protestant culture in which it's been rooted, that comes very close to the rhetoric used by white separatists.
well, I can't help it if you think that. I'm not a white separatist. I have you know, everything I've ever written is on the internet. You can read through it. I'm not a white separatist. So I'm sorry if you think that.
No, I'm not saying you're a white separatist. I said the language you're using comes very close to the language used by white separatists.
Well, I can't help it if you think that. That's not my intention, and that's not my view. And I don't think a fair-minded person would think it was.
No, again, I didn't say it was your view. I said that when you start arguing for, as long as we keep the black population in a certain box, as long as we retain our Anglo-Protestant culture to the extent that we had it, let's say, in 1950, you know, that's very Pat Buchanan-esque, for example, isn't it?
I like Pat Buchanan. He's a good guy.
Right.
Yeah, what's wrong with it? I mean, what's the alternative? Do you think that without an Anglo, what is it Professor Huntington says, an Anglo-Protestant culture, oh, I can't find it, without a dominant Anglo-Protestant culture, that we can stay a united nation? I don't think we can. I think diversity could break us up.
You go on to say a multicultural America will in time become a multi-creedal America with groups with different cultures espousing distinctive political values and principles rooted in their popular cultures. What happened to that Statue of Liberty with the hand held high in the harbor, going, give us you're tired, you're poor, yearning to be free?
Well, please.
The great melting pot, the great mosaic, as David Dinkins once called it. What happened to that?
Well, again, please stop saying that I said that. Professor Samuel Huntington said
as you pointed out, as you quoted in your book,
okay,
and which you are using to buttress your argument.
Good, thank you. Okay. Yeah, but look around you, Alan, and I give the evidence in my book, and Professor Robert Putnam gives it too. Look around you. This level of diversity is not working. I think my private guess, not really very well supported by any data, is that a nation probably can't hold itself together indefinitely without a majority culture of less than about 85%. I think about 10-15% is as much diversity as a nation can handle. And I think if you look around the world, and if you look at the examples from all around the world that I give in my book, I think they bear that out.
And that's why we're doomed.
Well,
Among other reasons.
That's one reason we're doomed.
Yeah.